what I'm going to do is ask Greg if he'd like to respond specifically to any of the points raised, and then we're going to open up for questions, and then we'll probably have about 15 minutes.
Well, lots of points. Let me respond to, I think, a general point that was made about, what are the barriers to going further? Because I think we're all agreed that we want to go further. My experience of how hardwired centralism is even more extreme than Mike's. When I encountered when I was a minister in the Treasury, when I was arguing for devolution of powers, being able to be to the benefit of the country by boosting the fortunes of particular places, that actually this was, the computer spat it out. It was not possible for local growth to exist, you might say. That if one place grew, then it had to be at the expense of something else, because there was a projection for the national growth of the economy, and Dan will be familiar with this. And therefore, arithmetically, that if you were to succeed in a place prospering, then somewhere else had to decline. And that this was so hardwired that actually it was an example of Cambridge that shot that to pieces. We were negotiating a city deal with Cambridge, and I had a group of overseas investors who turned up and would virtually sign affidavits to say that they would come and invest from overseas into the city of Cambridge, if but only if there was investment in the infrastructure, housing, and the road system to be able to accommodate their premises. If that didn't happen, they wouldn't come. If it did, they would. So indisputably, they were growing not only the local, but the national pie, as it were. And that proved the clincher. We were able to do that. And so I think that there are sort of ingrained forces over 100 years that are resistant to this, but I think we have made huge progress. But I think the secret for future success is, as I always put to cities when we were negotiating city deals, what you have to do is to make the government an offer it can't refuse. It needs to be so compelling that clearly that what is being proposed is so clearly in the national interest as well as the local interest, demonstrated convincingly with the economic analysis that is available, that actually it would be crazy for the government to stand in the way of it. And actually, when we've done that, that has been the case. And often that is about specifics. So the first city deal with Manchester made a lot on the Metrolink, for example. It was to say that if we devolved some of these budgets from Whitehall, it would be invested in the Metrolink. The connections across the city and out to the airport would be improved, and the economic impact on the city would generate more revenue locally and nationally. So whilst we clearly all on this panel agree with the direction, I think keeping it specific and showing how particular investments and particular initiatives are going to work, I think is something that we should not lose sight of in these discussions.
Thank you. And something I think you said in an earlier event I was at, it's about making the case for investment rather than subsidy.
Yes, exactly.
That will be of national benefit. We've got time to take a number of questions. I've got one at the back very quickly and one over here.
Dave Carter, I'm chair of something called Manchester Digital Lab, MAD Lab, ask me afterwards. I'm also part of the Manchester Urban Institute at the University of Manchester. Greg, industrial strategy is nothing if it doesn't look forward, and there's some really interesting stuff about Industry 4.0, about how we're going to cope with that. And I'm an optimist. I think in 20 years' time, there will be, like all the other industrial revolutions, a lot more jobs around. But in the short term, as Andy Haldane pointed out to us, a hell of a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Not much different than 25 years ago working in the city in economic development, big change, but we had grants, not loans, we had City Challenge, we had a single regeneration budget, we had intervention investment to deal with that transition. And by the way, we had something wonderful called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which actually supported so many bands in the city that, maybe... Can you say something about how the industrial strategy will deal with that very risky transition.
Thank you. I'll come back to it in a moment. I'll take another one over here.
One of the great assets in Manchester, and I had to leave Manchester in the 1970s to find work. I mean, Miles Platting in the 1970s was not a good place to live. The university is one of its greatest assets. It's the biggest university conurbation in the whole of Europe, I think. The tragedy is, as my son confirmed, you come here for 3 years and you leave. So what is the way that you can keep your graduates, coming back to it's not about money, it is about social capital. How can you keep your bright graduates in Manchester? The second thing I think is for Greg in a way. I know there's lots of competing interests, but if the Northern Powerhouse is going to work, it's Leeds and Manchester. How can you get a link to Leeds and Manchester?
Sorry, Liverpool.
Like the tube? And how can we do it quickly? Transport for the North have got a great plan, and it finishes in 2049. I'll be dead. Most people will be by the time that's done. How can we do it in the next 5 years? Leeds to Manchester is the key to making the Northern Powerhouse work.
Great. Should we do answers to those and come back to another couple? I mean, I can be very quick on the graduates. The vast majority of our graduates used to leave Manchester. The highest proportion now remain in Manchester. It's still not enough. It's still under 60%. And that is because there are good jobs here, and the jobs are growing, and there's good housing, and that's growing. Manchester Metropolitan University has a higher retention rate than that. I think it's over 70%, but it's going up really fast. And actually what's declining is the number going to London. Greg, do you want to comment on?
Sure, Nancy. So, listen, I completely. Every strategy, any strategy worth its salt, has to look forward, and one of the big features is to embrace the disruptive technologies. They're going to happen around the world, and it seems to me we're better advantaged if we are leading them than if we are late adopters and follow them. And often, as Nancy knows from the university, discoveries, if they can then be implemented and exploited locally rather than lost to overseas, can retain jobs there. But that's why the strategy, it seems to me, has to be about innovation and ideas, but also about skills. If you take the automotive sector, for example, the automotive industry, anyone goes to a car plant, the Industry 4.0 is already happening in the auto industry, and yet by embracing the technology, by having the most efficient plants in the world, we've been able to keep jobs and actually grow output in the auto industry. And so it seems to me we need to do that. But you need to do both at once, because I'm very conscious that if I or my colleagues wax lyrical about how in 20 years' time we're going to have driverless cars and vans that are going to not need drivers, then actually there are people who drive those vans at the moment who are thinking, well, that's all very exciting, but where does it leave me? And so I think it is incumbent on us all, but specifically the government, through the skills and training system to offer and make available a good future for everyone who is going to be disrupted by that. In terms of Paul's point about the Leeds and Manchester link, in fairness to Liverpool and Sheffield and Hull and dare I say Middlesbrough and Newcastle, links across the north are not nearly as good as they can be and should be and must be, and so this is a big agenda for the whole of the north. But specifically on your point, I mean the truth is that the distance I think between Leeds and Manchester is the same as the Central Line. And to journey from Leeds to Manchester on the train now is not a very enjoyable or relaxing experience, and seems like a kind of planned journey. It's an hour and a half, but also it's not a nice journey. Whereas anyone in London would think nothing about jumping on the tube to go from Ealing to Stratford and back again as part of the normal conduct of business in a city. And what comes from that, and Dan and Mike have written about this extensively, is what's called the agglomeration effect. So you take these great cities, just the two of them, for example, Leeds and Manchester, and you already double the population, the consumers, the markets, the connections, but actually in so doing, you create more than the sum of the parts, because you have the possibility easily to become a very big city to be able to operate at the scale it does. So listen, I am absolutely convinced that that is what needs to be done, and through the Transport for the North and the partnership, that has to be one of the projects that we move forward.
I'm going to take a few questions around here. I think, oh my God, I've got loads. Can you make them very short? I know Janine was one, and then we'll do one here and one back there. We'll do 3 or 4. Can you make them short?
I can do a very short one. Is there a role for philanthropy in your industrial strategy moving forward? We're a city of Rylands, we're a city of Whitworth. I know that Nancy and the university are doing fantastic things, connecting with those alumni that are maybe leaving the city but giving something back. What do we think? I'm from a European family where it's common to give 10% back. If we're to pick up Joanne's point about addressing inequalities, is there a recognition that there should be some form of official philanthropy?
Okay, thank you. We've got lots of hands up. I've got one a bit further back. Is that Emma?
Hello, Sarah Williams from the Land Trust. I just wanted to raise the point about the fact that obviously the key theme here is place, and what attracts people, what attracts the talent, what attracts inward investors is the place. One thing that is often forgotten is the natural capital, the natural assets, the green infrastructure, which actually underpins a lot of our reasons for wanting to live in a place. What is the industrial strategy doing to invest in its natural assets as well as its human assets and its other industrial assets?
Thank you. We'll take a couple more. I've got one here and then one at the back, I think. And we'll see how many more we've got time for.
Yeah, place is also about centres of excellence and the importance of skills groups having the benefit of juxtaposition one with another in a multidisciplinary sense, agglomeration if you like. So, Manchester, as an example of a city region devising its industrial strategy, needs to think about where it can excel in a national sense, so that we're not spreading our seed corn across the land in too thin a layer, so that some cities are going to be excellent in some areas and other cities will be excellent in other areas, rather than treading on each other's toes or being too dilute in what each one does. So how will perhaps central government control in inverted commas that risk, so that we're devising discrete centres rather than treading on each other's toes in devising a national industrial strategy?
Thank you. So trying to get as many answers and as short as possible and as quickly as possible. Role of philanthropy. Joanne.
I think it's got an incredibly important role, and I think the industrial strategy is silent on the culture aspect to economic growth, and I think there is something in that very much. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks. Natural assets.
I think they have a huge role to play, and it's a classic area where the government, and indeed on this one, the European Union should let go. One of the things it's very difficult to do with a lot of European funds is to invest in public realm. But if you don't have to step very far out of this building to find public realm that is the biggest single detractor from investment. So what I would hope will come out of the industrial strategy is just devolving pots of money, being clear that that's got to deliver outcomes, but then let local places decide. And I think a lot of local places will decide to protect local environment or to try and recreate local environment where it's been lost because of industrial dereliction.
So then we had excellence and skill-based and balancing. I don't know if Diane wants to say something, and then Greg, go to see if you wanted to say anything.
On which one?
Well, balancing across cities or on skills.
It's very hard, I think, to decide that one city is going to do certain things and another is going to do something else, and that they're all going to grow equally, because these agglomeration economies are not only very strong, but they're very rooted where they are. And I think actually you can't do this in a top-down way. You have to see what's going to grow from bottom up. When central government has tried to do this, it's thought about it in much too broad, generic terms. And we ended up having something like 28 nanotechnology centres, which is ridiculous. But if you look at what skills are, what university knowledge base is there, or what craft skills are already there, or what past experience and history is already there, then those things can emerge organically. But I think the balancing question is obviously one of the really difficult ones in industrial strategy. But what industrial strategy has got to do is concentrate on, ultimately, on productivity and growth.
Well, that's a big theme. In terms of the natural capital and the cultural capital, it is absolutely indispensable. The economic and social success of Greater Manchester, in my view, is indivisible from its cultural success. If people want to live, whether graduates being retained or people being born here or people moving here, people want to live and work in a place. They don't want to just do it because their job is there. They want to do it because this is a fantastic place to live in every aspect of their life. And I would say that if it doesn't meet that condition of being an attractive place, then however economically compelling, people will not make the decision to move there. And so it is absolutely indivisible, it seems to me, from the role of place. And just to reinforce that, we published last week, or he published last week, Peter Bazalgette has led a review of the creative industries as part of the industrial strategy, proposing a sector deal from the creative industries. And what he is proposing in that there is specifically for each area of the country a devolution of cultural funds to places precisely to support the development of the economy. So I hope you'll have a look at that. Google it, Bazalgette Review. It's a very good read. And in terms of the Centres of Excellence proposal and the requirement not to spread things too thinly, actually, agglomeration is an antidote to that, because of course the bigger the area or the better the connections, the more that you can have different things going on within that. And if you take the vast sprawl that is London and all of the population there, you've got all sorts of different things. You've got financial services, you've got tech, you've got in other parts of the capital still life sciences, advanced engineering. You can accommodate them in a big place, so you don't have to choose just one thing. So if we have the vision that we share to have good connections, just like the tube, between not just Leeds and Manchester, but Sheffield, Liverpool, Hull and Newcastle too, then actually you can have lots of different things going on in that area. But part of the reason why I think we broke through with these city deals is that there was an element of challenge, and some people in the room were veterans of that. There were proposals made locally, and then there was a negotiation as to whether this stacked up, whether it made sense, and whether, as Dan said, actually it's simply replicating what 20 other places have, and there's no reason to think that it's going to be particularly advantaged in this place. And I think that challenge is important if we're to make the case stick.
First of all, I'd like to accept all of the apologies on behalf of my Liverpudlian compatriots. Thank you very much. Great to be here to do that. So Industry 4.0 is less about industry working in silos and more about innovation across boundaries. And former colleagues of mine at the RSA have just released some new thinking about mission-led industrial strategy, which speaks precisely to that point. I think that one of the main problems with place-based strategy is that it speaks to a place's strengths rather than its challenges. I think the latest statistics that I've seen recently are that there's over 4,000 people in Greater Manchester experiencing homelessness. What can we do to create a truly innovative industrial strategy which speaks to our challenges as well as our strengths?
Okay, thank you. Then right at the back, I know you've been asking for ages, and down here's Brown.
Louis Coiffet. Minister, what do you want universities to do in the industrial strategy?
And then one at the front, and then just wait for the microphone, and then last one at the back, and then we'll take some answers, and then we'll conclude.
I was glad that Joanne raised the question of skills, which does seem to me to be absolutely critical. We've heard a great deal about universities this evening, and there's quite a lot about universities in the industrial strategy paper. The great ignored bit of education is further education, and it seems to me that, that was hardly mentioned, but it wasn't mentioned at all tonight. It also appeared hardly at all in the Green Paper. And that seems to me to be absolutely critical as part of a sensible industrial strategy. And I just hope that it's not overlooked.
Thank you. We're going to take the last one right at the back, and then we'll have. Sorry. Oh, you've got the mic. Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Yes, it's you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Ryan Carano from the Institute of Research in Economic and Fiscal Studies and former Manchester alum. My question regards the innovation aspect of the industrial strategy. So Manchester and London, for example, are European leaders in innovative startups and new technologies and leading the fourth industrial revolution. If you're empowering these regions to continue with the growth, is there a risk that this will exacerbate regional inequality? Because there's something specific about the infrastructures in these places that are allowing them to be so successful. Thank you.
Good. So I'll let Greg answer first, because he may need to leave for another event in a moment, and we'll pick up afterwards.
Well, great question. I'm delighted that Liverpool is represented here, because in fact the first City deal was with Liverpool, and such was the irritation in Manchester that Howard and Richard Leese were down on the train within the next week, and were very keen to boast that the Manchester City deal was bigger than the Liverpool City deal, so they got their own back that way. But a bit of friendly rivalry between Manchester and Liverpool, I think, has been long-standing. The idea of missions, as well as the kind of cross-cutting themes that we've been talking about, skills and innovation and devolution to place, these are very important things. But actually, I think to galvanise our move into the future with a series of national and local missions, I think is incredibly attractive and important. Let me take one: clean energy. We all know, both legally and because it's the right thing, we and the rest of the world are going to be moving from an energy system that was heavily polluting, heavily wasteful, into one that has to be clean and much more decentralised and interactive. It seems to me, for us, with all of our history and skills and abilities in that, to make it our business, not just to sign up and promote our adherence to emissions targets that we do enthusiastically, but to say we are going to be the nation in the world that is going to develop the technology, implement it before others, and export it around the world, seems to me just the sort of realistic mission that we can subscribe to. And there are others as well when it comes to mobility and healthcare. So I think that is, you'll see when we publish the white paper, that's going to be a good part of it. Now, what should universities be doing? Now, that is very much a trick question, because universities prize correctly their independence of government, and very often, as Nancy does, and I welcome it, tell government what we should be doing rather than the other way around. So I certainly won't be issuing any instructions, but I would say a couple of things in response. Firstly, to do what universities are doing very successfully. Our universities are amongst our biggest strengths as an economy, both in terms of students and research. Our reputation around the world is stellar when it comes to our universities. And a lot of that comes from that independence and ministers not being able to tell Nancy what she should be researching and that the money can only be used for this. So that independence is essential. What I know that there is an increasing appetite and enthusiasm to do is more of it, and so getting more research funding into universities is, in my view, a very good investment and would be well spent. Making sure that the connections, the local leadership that Nancy embodies, the University of Manchester practices in this city is really important. I mean, Mike talked about the decline of institutions in some cities. Actually, for a lot of cities, the universities are the biggest, most visible institutions that are there beyond the democratic institutions. So that is important. And I think there is a recognised role that the universities, including Manchester, are practicing, which is to not just to educate and discover, but to produce and to spin off companies, firms, entrepreneurs, and actually take them keep them under the wing of the university and help them grow and develop. And a lot of the success of the University of Manchester is helping those startups and incubating them. And so that, I think, has a lot further to go as well.